I was asked to come and talk about worldview from an atheist position. I want to say that I appreciate the fact that you guys are willing to listen. The idea of this is that you're going to have the opportunity to push back, to ask any questions that you want. So I will lay down some ideas for you. I'm going to make an argument in 3 parts for you to respond to. Just from the position that I hold, some things about me. I grew up in this area in East Cobb. I was one of the first kids ever to go to Soap Creek Elementary School. Then I went to East Cobb Middle School, went to Wheeler High School. I actually went to college at Kennesaw State University. I did not Go Owls. Heck yeah, I did not grow up in a Christian home. My parents were probably nominally Christian, I guess, in the same way that most Americans are. I mean, you go to church a couple of times a year, you celebrate Christmas. I hadn't the slightest idea what Easter was about except bunnies church was not a part of our life. Never talked about Christianity, never talked about God. I wasn't a guy who grew up a Christian and then left the faith. There just was never any faith to leave. I didn't grow up with a belief in God. I grew up with an unbelief. And so different from people who grew up in churches around here, there's a lot of times I think that you guys take for granted that things are normal that don't seem normal to people from outside the church. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a few reasons, 3 things that I think are about the things that you believe that are not good. I'm going to hope that as Christians you're willing to listen without getting too upset, although I'm sure some of the things I'm going to say will be upsetting to you, because I intend to tell you that what you believe is not only wrong, but dangerous. And that's the case I'll be making with you guys tonight. But again, you'll have the chance to talk back to me when I get done. All right, so let's talk about the case that I want to make. Number 1, here will be the 3 points I'm going to make. The first one is that there is absolutely no scientific evidence or proof that God exists. You live in a culture where scientific advancement is happening on a scale that the world has never experienced before. The world has never seen anything like this before. And yet, as we keep going with more and more scientific explanations that cover almost everything, the gamut of things that we used to be able to attribute to God, weather changes, the different changes in the season, droughts, excessive rain, fires, all of these things that we used to attribute to a God, we are becoming more and more convinced have nothing to do with that, in the sense that there has never been a point where science failed to explain things when we examined it scientifically, and there's never been a thing that God explained better than science. So as we're going through, there is no reason for somebody who did not grow up like you, if you grew up in a church, to come to a belief in God, because all the advancements that are happening in the world, the quick rate at which things get better and better and better, are all dictated by. It was not prayer that stopped cholera outbreaks. It was the recognition of what causes cholera and contaminated water supplies. It was not prayer and God that stopped the diseases like smallpox in the United States. It was vaccinations. It was not, none of these things ended because God interceded on man's behalf. Every single one of these things that we have overcome as a culture and as a group of humanities, a collective humanity, have been overcome because people solved the problem using science. So the first thing is there is no scientific evidence for God. There's no reason then for anyone outside of the Christian faith to embrace a view of God, and the entire flow of science is demonstrating that God has no explanatory power. Now I want to get to the next part, which is why your beliefs are, in my mind, dangerous. Because you need to understand you are now a minority. If you actually believe in things like a dead man died and was resurrected, in the United States, you are now believe that a virgin can give birth, you are a minority in the United States. If you believe any of these essential Christian doctrines, that God wrote a book, you are now a smaller part of the United States community than the larger part. The majority of people will reject these Christian doctrines that are so important to you. So as a minority, here are the things that you need to understand that make you dangerous now to the rest of society as they've moved on and advanced. And here are those things that make you dangerous. Number 1, the first thing is that you threaten scientific advancement. And by that I mean you continually want to use God as an explanation where there is an explanation out there that we have not yet discovered. And that threatens advancement because once you say God, we stop. Once you say God, we stop looking. And we should never stop looking. We should always be looking for a natural explanation. See, I'm a materialistic naturalist. What I mean by that is that I believe the only thing that exists in the universe are the things that we can experience materially. There are no supernatural events. There are no spirits. There's nothing out there like that. There's no God. There is just us in this physical universe. Now, that belief system produces a lot of great science because every time we see something happen, let's use something easy like ice freezes. We see ice freezing in the freezer, and we ask the question, why did that water become hard and cold? Well, the answer isn't because God willed it to be so. And if we answer with that kind of an answer, we stop exploring for reasons. As opposed to looking, maybe there's something about the nature of water when it's exposed at sea level to a certain level of temperature and the molecules slow down a bit that changes its state from a liquid to a solid. And when we now go to that with more complicated questions like the mind, the existence of the mind. Christians just want to stop and say it's the soul or the spirit, but science demands that we continue to push forward. And if we listen to the calls from Christian thinkers in our culture right now that say stop looking for some explanation of the mind because it is the soul and God has put it there, then you hold back scientific advancement by offering God as an answer. And that's not good. That's a bad thing. You will keep us from getting to more cures, to a better understanding of the human condition, towards a cleaner, more productive, friendly society by constantly offering God as answers to questions when it's not necessary. So you hurt culture in that way. And then finally, the other way that you hurt culture is that as a minority, when you bring your religious views to the public, you unnecessarily emotionally injure people who are doing nothing wrong except offending your views that, as I've already said, have become a minority in our culture. For example, gay marriage. What's wrong with gays when they get married? Well, to the Christian community, everything. And so you go out and you tell them that they're wrong. There's something dysfunctional about them, something sinful about the nature of their relationships. And you hurt them. For no reason other than because your private, personal religious beliefs are driving you to interfere into a culture now that is abandoning those beliefs. Let's talk about abortion for a second. Women get abortion for all sorts of reasons. And then they go to get an abortion, a woman that is desperate and poor and cannot possibly afford a child, and she goes there and she has some Christian waiting before she walks in there to get her abortion, praying for her, while at the same time condemning her as a baby killer. At the worst moment of her life, you're there to make her feel worse. You're a minority with personal religious beliefs. But when you extend those out into public dialogue, you unnecessarily hurt people who don't share those beliefs. And the culture is doing just fine without that interference. And so now let me talk just for a moment, and I'm going to open up for questions, because I want to cover what I've said. Materialistic naturalism is the best way to understand the universe that you find yourself in. It's the easiest way to understand and to examine the world, that we have things that we can touch, sense, taste, experience in the world around us, and we trust that they are there. The interaction between these things will lead us to greater truth as we understand the world that we live in by examining how these things interact with each other. To posit the existence of God is to go outside those boundaries, to explain that something, or to also declare that something we can't see, we can't touch, we can't read, we can't melt, we can't burn, any of those things that we've learned to depend on as far as ways to determine truth. We can't do any of that. We're just expected to believe that God exists because you say so. And that belief in God is going to hurt us both because it's going to hold back scientific advancement. You're going to interfere with the culture's move towards a better world. Every good thing that has happened for the most part over the last 100 years towards the advancement of the common good has happened through science, not prayer and religion. And ultimately, because your personal private held beliefs, now the beliefs of a minority in our culture, people when you take them to the public square and condemn them as bad for doing things. The reason they're supposedly bad is because they go against what your book says. So, in a nutshell, there it is. I don't know if that's what you wanted from me, but now you are welcome to ask me anything that you want. Yes, sir.
So, why do you yourself believe that gay marriage is okay?
What do I care what they do? I mean, two people love each other. Whose business? What business of mine? What they do with their life?
Well, look at it from an evolutionary standpoint. There's no way for them to reproduce.
So, there's too many people anyway. Evolution. If the whole population suddenly decided to become gay, that would be a big deal. But it's about 1% to 2% of the population. They've always been there. They've always been a part of our community. They've always been a part of every community of human beings. What do I care what they do with their lives outside of it? So why would I interfere with it? And it's not like the whole world has suddenly gone into homosexual relationships. It's just a small number of people. Let them be. Yes, sir.
Hold on, but you said you're in the minority. So, but they're in the minority if you're only 2%.
Yeah, but the majority of people don't care what they do in their bedrooms. So your minority-held position is trying to influence what they're allowed to do with the choices that they make in your life, and unnecessarily hurting them. By the way, do you know the homosexual community has the single highest suicide rate of any community out there because they feel so bad about who and what they are? So that's why I said it's ultimately destructive. Yes, sir.
Well, I just wanted to say one of your facts was wrong about a majority of people agreeing with gay marriage, because right now it's 60% don't believe in gay marriage in America, and America is one of the most Western civilizations ever, and like there are no other.
Okay, well, everywhere it was put up to vote, and in the sense of that there was no cry. Every data I've said says the opposite. Every data point that I've read since the fact that it was turned over in Oberfell at the Supreme Court. You guys are getting kind of fixated on the gay marriage thing, but heck, let's go ahead and fight about it if you want to. I don't care. I got all night. So but since the Oberfell position came up, I have not seen anywhere where there's been a groundswell of the American electorate saying, let's get rid of gay marriage. As a matter of fact, the overwhelming number of people that I've seen in polls say, move on. Just move past it. Who cares? It has nothing to do with anything. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. The sense of, okay, wait, you asked me if the Bible's a lie. That's a strange question. Is Shakespeare a lie? Well, sure, Romeo and Juliet probably has some historical basis in some of the things, or Henry V, or any of those Shakespeare plays. I don't know if I'd call them a lie. They're fiction. So there's probably some historical things that actually happen in the Bible, but do you think snakes talk? Do you think virgins give birth? Okay, well, and that's why you're a minority, yes. People. First of all, I don't think the Bible is a book. I think it is 66 books. A great majority of them were written long. I mean, when you talk about the Old Testament, you're talking about Bronze Age books. Things that were written so long ago that they didn't know anything. And the idea that people that live today in our advanced culture would look back and try to find out what somebody there wrote in order to just make decisions about how you're going to live. But it's just different writers, different authors. As a matter of fact, there are some books in the Bible that scholarship tells us have multiple different authors. We have the slightest idea who wrote these books. But hey, just a work of fiction that some people got advanced. Okay, yes, sir, in the white shirt there.
You were talking about your first point was how science has never proved to God or has a little.
Yeah.
Science is like a natural thing. Science is not supernatural. Science will never be able to prove a God or disprove a God, because God is supernatural and not natural of this world. So nothing we have or can have will ever be able to prove him to be supernatural.
So I just have to accept he exists, even though there's absolutely no way for me to know his existence, because every way that we know things does not speak to his existence. That's not going to convince a whole heck of a lot of people. Yes, ma'am. Do I believe in God? No, I don't believe in ghosts. No. Okay. Absolutely not. I believe in nothing. As a matter of fact, when I was in college, I was an actor, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but every theater in the United States, according to theater people, is haunted. And so there was that 7 stages. There was the ghost of this little girl that would steal things and mess you up. And I would go backstage and taunt the ghost of 7 stages every night, and it would freak the other actors out. One girl was literally in tears because she was so upset with me. I was like, honey, there's no ghost. I am just taunting an empty room. That's what I'm trying to help you to understand. It doesn't exist. Yes, ma'am.
So you said, like, your last point was science is the reason why everything good, well, for humans has been.
Yeah, every advancement of the good for the common good has happened through science, and zero things have happened through prayer. How about that?
How do you know what good is? Like, what is your?
Well, when little kids stop being paralyzed by smallpox, that's good. When they die of smallpox, that's bad. Huh? You don't understand why kids dying is bad and by kids being healthy is good? Why is it? Because kids dying is bad. See, this is weird to me. The Christians, you guys seem to think that I need the Bible to tell me that bad things are bad. When it's really easy for a normal person who can empathize with somebody else and understand, empathy's fine. Empathy's enough. Do y'all understand what empathy is, by the way? Empathy is when I can look at another human being and I can, from my relationship with them, say, okay, I understand what I would or would not want to do based on my relationship with them. And I don't need the Bible or anybody else to tell me it's wrong to rape a woman. It's just wrong. And everybody knows that it's good to be nice to somebody and bad to rape them. Wait, hey, there's other hands up. They'll just calm down, yes.
Do you believe that like Jesus was alive, like that he walked the earth?
So I believe that I believe that there's some historical nugget there. Yeah, there was a guy that lived. That is a long way from saying there was a guy named Jesus to there was a guy named Jesus who was buried into the ground, who crawled out of the grave and then flew up into the sky like Superman after declaring himself Lord. I don't believe that part. But sure, he was alive. Why not? Yes, sir, in the referee shirt in the back. Just because you look so official. Nothing. You die. You cease to exist. Huh?
Then why is it bad for kids to die?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Why is it bad when kids die if there's nothing, right?
Okay, so I got a parent that loves their child, and their child dies of cancer. Because they can tell you that they love them. They can tell you love their kids. So you're telling me that everybody out there that doesn't read the Bible doesn't love their kids, or that's not a Christian, or they can't possibly love their kids without God? Boy, the adults are getting in on this. Yes, sir, in the back.
So I follow a question to Alan here.
Okay.
So the Superman theory, just for
Wait, that's your book, not mine. Yeah.
correct.
Although I like Superman books as well.
I'm just trying to
Okay.
get your words so
All
we're
right.
on the same page here. Do you believe that's the most fictitious part of the Bible, in your opinion? I'm just for my own curiosity.
When Jesus flew away?
The resurrection story.
I don't know that I could pick a most... By definition, I don't think fictitious has grades. It either happened or it didn't. And there's a lot of things that I think are common sense in the Bible that obviously didn't happen. And then there's a lot of things that I was like, okay, sure. Did Jesus live? Sure. Did Jesus, after talking to a group of people, suddenly fly away like Neo at the end of the Matrix? I doubt it. Okay. So,
Just for everybody's reference, so we understand when you actually know talking about, can you name a few events that you don't believe occurred in the Bible?
well, I don't think Jesus rose from the dead.
You said that one. That.
Okay. I don't think he went around... I don't think he cast demons out of somebody and then put them into a herd of pigs and ran them off of a cliff. I think that we've gotten past in our day and believing illness is caused by demons. I'm surprised that's not more problematic for Christians in retrospect when they read it, that all of these illnesses are cured by the casting out of a demon. Or I don't think that people go insane because they have living within them. I think that there's psychological problems that we've diagnosed. That's just the New Testament. Let's go back. Anytime you have God and doing anything weird, go ahead. Like Thomas Jefferson, the President of the United States, famous deist. Went through, you can go to the Smithsonian right now and look at the Jeffersonian Bible, and all he's done is carve out everything where anything supernatural happened. And he did this to demonstrate it's still a pretty good book with pretty good ethics. You just got to get rid of all the silly stuff. Wow, there's a lot of hands. All right, let's go with you, sir. You seem very eager.
Where do you find your source of hope? Like, why don't you just like give up and just die? Like,
Why don't I just give up and die?
He's a gay.
This is your greeting the non-believer into your church body. No offense, but at least you didn't tell me to burn in hell. Somebody's told me that fairly recently. Why don't I just give up and die? Because I love my kids. I love the time that I get to spend with them. I don't need a Bible to tell me that that's good. I would like every moment that I get to spend with them. My wife had a stroke this past summer. I thought she was going to die on the way to the hospital. I was terrified that I would wake up the next day and not have her with me. Not because I was worried where her eternal soul would rest, but because I love my wife. And the idea of her not being there crushed me. So that's where my hope comes from. And why do I believe in a hope for tomorrow? Because I want a better world for my kids than the one they live in today. All right, let me get somebody that has not gone right there.
So when your wife had stroke and you were terrified, like, what did you do that you thought would make her?
Doctor? Got her to the hospital where they give her medicine. No, I didn't stop. See, and I would bet. Here's the thing that I know: every person in this room would do the exact same thing. If their friend and their family got sick, after you get them to the doctor. So my wife is having a stroke, and you actually think that the best thing I could have done would have been to stop and let's pray, as opposed to me call the ambulance and get her to the hospital before she dies. Please don't do that if someone in your family gets sick. Call the ambulance, then pray all you want once the doctors start working on them.
We pray all we want whenever we want.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I know a lot of people have done this. They've listened to atheists speak, and they've said, like they disagree with their points. What if your children, became Christians? How would you approach that, personally?
Probably the same way I am about every time my kids come home and I think they're profoundly wrong. I would tell them that I think you're profoundly wrong, but they're free. Once they get out, I'm not going to start going to church to humor them, but when I think somebody's profoundly wrong, I tell them, I think you're wrong, and I think you need to get right. If they decided to come home and suddenly, let me check the age in this room. Okay, if they retroactively started believing in Santa Claus, I would tell them, Santa's not real, and all those presents come from me, right?
That's the worst thing you said the entire time.
All right. I don't think it was created. I think that about 13.5 billion years ago, there was a Big Bang. And after the Big Bang, there was a period called the inflationary period where things happened very quickly. And then after that, when things settled down and the massive amounts of heat came to a manageable level, then you started to have gravitational fields that were grown out of collective accretion where things were gathering together. Particularly our solar system, and now every material that you see in the universe came from the heart of a star that was under a tremendous amount of pressure. Boom, it goes out. And the accretion that started our solar system was started when gravitational fields start to grow and things start to bump into each other and they start to collide. And sooner or later, you got planets and everything circling around. Nothing. Why did it have to come from? Where did God come from? Where did God come from? Okay, no. There's a principle. Wait. There's a principle called Occam's razor, which means I don't need to multiply my entities as an explanation factor until I'm absolutely forced to. And if I have a universe that has always been there in some form or another, or I have to say, how about a God that extends, I have unnecessarily multiplied my entities. It's not necessary. If you're asking me to believe that there can be an eternal, self-sustaining existence, then I don't see why I have to go beyond the world that I live in and posit yet another eternal, self-sustaining existence. Then let's just start with the universe. And quantum fluctuations show us that events happen all the time in a quantum vacuum that are uncaused. So I don't know why it's necessary for me to put a one here. It just has to fit the current model of science. Okay, I'm going to take like 2 more questions. Y'all really want me to take her, the Georgia shirt, and then, okay. Because I was asked to. Because y'all asked me to. Now I told you though. I did tell you that I genuinely believe that your views are dangerous to the world around us and that they hold back the growth or expansion of things that are going on, right? I genuinely believe that. So why wouldn't I say something As I told you, right? Who'd asked me about my daughter, my family coming? Okay, as I told you, if I think you're profoundly wrong, I'm going to tell you, I think you're profoundly wrong. I think you're profoundly wrong. Yes?
What if you're wrong? What if there is a
I'm not sure I understand, because what if I'm wrong? And what if there is a heaven and a hell? Yeah. All right. Touche. All right. Yeah. So is this some sense of Pascal's wager? Is that what you're offering here? The idea that all things being equal, I should wager on the side that God is real because I have more to lose if I'm wrong than if I wager. The central point of Pascal's wager, though, is that all things being equal. And that's not the state we find ourselves in. I don't believe we're all things being equal state, heir to the side of God. What you're saying is, even though every bit of evidence that you see tells you that there is no God, go ahead and believe in him because I ought to be afraid of eternal punishment. Now, this is a problem for Christians in evangelism. If all you got is to try to make me afraid of what's going to happen to me after I die, then you don't have a whole heck of a lot that's useful to me today. He asked me what's going to happen to me after I die. Did I accurately reflect your question? You got something else you'd like to add? He thinks I'm being unfair. Kind of, sort of. Okay. So he disagrees with you. I absolutely did. I said all things aren't equal. I said Pascal's wager is dependent on all things being equal. It's not equal. The evidence supports the idea that there is no God. Okay, everybody take a deep breath for a second, please. Everybody take a deep breath. Hold on, it's 7:30. I would like you to take a deep breath, hands down, hands down. Everybody take a breath in. Okay. Hands down. Hands down. Okay. Please. 1 moment. Relax. All right. I am absolutely a very good friend of Pat's. And everything that I've said to you would represent what I've believed about 25 years ago at this point right now, or longer ago. I am professionally an apologetics guy who travels around the country and the world talking about the belief in Christ, defending the view of Christianity and the idea that Christianity is true. What you've just been through, if you knew who I was before I got here, like James knew, was that what we do is to try to see how you guys do under pressure. I put you under a lot of pressure to see how you would respond to somebody telling you your worldview was wrong, to give you an angle to see how you would respond to it. Now you have time to go over a little bit of it, and we'll discuss how you did and some things to help you do better. Now, here's my question. How do you think you did? Okay, who would like to tell me what you think your biggest problem? By the way, I think for an interesting thing to all you guys, all the adults in this room knew beforehand, I think, that I was going to do this, and they swore to me before we came in that they weren't going to say a thing. And I told them, and they all were talking about that. I was like, don't say anything, especially you. And I was like, you. And I told them. But I told you out there, I was like, you're going to have to say something sooner or later. It's not going to work because I'm going to make somebody so crazy. Okay, now, what do you think was the thing you struggled with the most? Yes, sir.
I would say the strength is they all stuff that they've done.
Yeah, I will say this. Yeah, part of point 3 of my argument that I gave you to start off had one purpose and one purpose only. It was to make you feel bad about being Christians. It was to make you feel bad about defending your faith. Now, I have shut up huge audiences with those kind of things before. You guys never did. Man, you guys were eager. I mean, right from the outset, hands up. I would tell you some of you guys need to marshal your angry face because like 5 seconds into my talk as an atheist, I was getting serious hate from some people in this room. And that's one of the things you need to be aware of. Speakers see the entire audience. And so I was able to watch and track with some of you. And now, as far as I know, nobody tried to run from the room, right? That does happen occasionally. People get up and storm out and they have to be brought back. So, but what do you got? Yes, sir.
I think the hardest part was like how it's 1 versus like 40. So like you get an answer and then have to move to another one without them like being able to elaborate or like kind of a conversation back and forth to build off each other.
You think I was a little slippery?
Not your fault, just like
You don't think that was my fault? You don't think I was intentionally slippery a couple of times? Yeah.
Well, we didn't have anything together.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, you're right. But let me warn you, as somebody who talks to people on the other side of this issue all over the world, especially in the United States, all around the country, they're slippery. And you think I'm slippery? Wait until you've got a college professor standing in front of you and you disagree with something he says, because he's not going to just shut you down and start giving you answers to questions you didn't ask, but he's going to put all the authority and specter that he has of his PhD and just loom it over you in front of a group of people. And so you have to be ready for slippery. You have to be prepared for it. And so, no, that was not always just a matter of circumstance. I was purposely slippery with you guys a couple of times. But you've got to realize that that is a part of talking to people when it comes especially to anything that you're emotionally married to, which are your beliefs. Yes, ma'am?
I think, like, your intention was to get us, like, mad.
No, it actually wasn't. You guys, no. Let me be clear. Do you know where the anger came from? Y'all.
Yeah, that's it.
I actually started with the intention of trying to be polite, but you guys went straight at me. And you may not believe that. You may think that you guys were being measured and polite, but I see your faces. And I saw how angry you were, and I felt the anger that you had. And so that when, man, and you guys, it's like y'all couldn't wait for one person to stop yelling at me for the next one to get in. And so the anger was brought to the conversation by you. And I just met it. Now, let me be very clear. That's also going to happen. Greg Koukl in his book, Tactics, and if you haven't Koukhl's book, Tactics, he's the head of an organization called Stand to Reason, and you ever want to have a meaningful conversation with somebody, buy that book immediately and read it. And one of the warnings that he gives at the beginning of his book, and it's something that I take very seriously, because you know what I talk about more than anything? Abortion. And if you don't think people are angry when they start to talk about abortion, man, they are angry. From the second you come in disagreeing with them, they bring a lot of heat. And Greg Koukl's warning is, if anyone gets mad, you lose. If anyone in this conversation gets mad, you've lost. And so your job in every conversation, now that's just talking about abortion. When we're talking about the gospel, we're talking about what they need to be restored to a right relationship with God. You can't afford in the 2 minutes that you have to talk to them to allow their lost condition to make you angry. Because you already know when the conversation starts they disagree with you. So you have to marshal all of the peace that you have available to yourself and to get yourself ready to respond with grace and mercy. Because the emotion didn't come from me. I tried to shut y'all up by making you feel bad, but the anger came from y'all. And all I did was meet it. All I did was say, and by the way, I was fine. I was like, okay, you guys want to go mad? Let's go mad. Because it hurts you. It hurts your case. All right? All right. No, please finish. No? Okay. What else? No, what else? What else do y'all think? Yes, sir.
Real quickly, that book, Tactics. Jay reads it twice a year, maybe?
Oh, yeah, I read it all the time, yeah.
I mean, and it's not something, because it is very refreshing on how...
It is not a huge, massive book, yeah.
It gives you...
And we'll talk...
and all that.
And we'll talk a little bit about some of the tactical ways of conversation in just a second. Yes, sir.
Who's the author of it?
Greg Koukl. It's actually on Amazon. It'll be listed as Gregory Koukl. Koukl. All right. Yes, sir.
You do a lot in public speaking forums. Is there anything in that book that you can experience if you were in a Q&A session with the speaker, how to not let them
Yes. Number one, a couple of you guys came at me with things that are that are really good arguments for the existence of God. The problem was you don't clearly understand what you were trying to argue enough to be able to work through exactly what you mean. For example, if you want to argue the moral argument for the existence of God, then you need to know exactly what you're saying to somebody as to, now you tried to, y'all came at me with why is it bad? Why is it bad? To try to get me to engage that idea. The problem is every atheist I talk to is going to say exactly what I said back to you. Do you really need the Bible to tell you it's wrong to rape a woman? Do you really need the Bible to tell you it's bad when a child dies of smallpox? Do you really need God to explain these things are awful to you? Well, no, not experientially or emotionally. You don't need God to explain why it hurts when your child dies. But what you do need is a lawgiver to explain why there is a way that we ought to be. And so this requires you to prepare yourself to make that argument, to understand what you're going to do so that you can make very short-term arguments. Now, when you were asking questions, and in this particular case, the forum didn't serve you well. Asking questions is a great thing. But before you go to why is that good or bad, which I think is a good way to start, understand basically the question you're asking. And Greg Kokel says in Tactics, the first tactical question you want to ask is, what do you mean by that? So when you're saying, why is it good, what do you mean by good? Help me to understand what you mean. Now, y'all got there. That actually came from the audience at one point, at which point I got slippery. And I turned it back around on you. But you have to be disciplined enough when I start saying, do I really need a child to know that my child dying of smallpox is a bad thing? You need to be able to say, that's not what I said. I didn't ever say, and I have never argued in any forum that I've ever been in, that atheists need God to know what's right and wrong. That's what we call an epistemological question. What we're going to argue is that they need God in order for there to be a standard to begin with. And when we talk about right and wrong, in order for there to be a way that things ought to be, and a way that you ought to be, there has to have been an ought giver. There has to have been someone that said it ought to be this way. And absent of that, then there is no ought, then there is no real bad. And so you would point out, that's just a subjective position then. That's a personal preference. That's an emotional condition. I understand that you can be upset that your child died of cancer, but why is it wrong? What is it a violation of God's will for this world or the way that we ought to have been? And those are two different questions. So the way to get better at that is to learn some of those basic ways that we defend the faith. The moral argument for the existence, I see you, ma'am. The moral argument for the existence of God is that in order for there to be bad or evil, there must be a person, a being behind, a moral lawgiver. There are moral laws, therefore there is a moral lawgiver. And stick to that. Now, yes, ma'am.
Okay, two questions.
Yes.
How do you usually do in your debate? Is there a winner and a loser? Like, does somebody decide which one has a loser? And then when you've been debating all these years, have you ever questioned their faith and thought, well, maybe they do have a point?
No, not because of a debate. I've never questioned my faith because of a debate. Now, if you poll audiences walking out, it's actually the way that you determine a winner or a loser in a debate is very difficult because people who come into debates to watch them, by and large, leave with the same viewpoint that they walked in. And when they think that their side did poorly, they don't think that their overall view did poorly. What they will say is their view was not well represented. Whether that's true or not, that's what they're going to say. And so what you do is you measure a very small number of people. So if there was a 2% swing, so if they're walking in the debate, and let's say 65% of people held one view, and 35, if my math holds correctly, held the other view, and you walk out, and 63% of people walk out holding the view they walked in, except for now 2% have jumped, the other one has gone up 2%. Technically speaking, even though the majority of people still believe what they believe, the other side won, because they brought over 2% more to their side.
Not like a debate person that.
There can be. Yeah, they can score them. It's just not normally. Normally, debates are done so that the audience can hear this free exchange of ideas. Let's go to the Kalam cosmological argument, which is what you were trying to bring up when you were talking about the beginning of the universe. And you said, the Kalam cosmological argument. K-A-L-A-M, Kalam cosmological argument. When you were saying, when all the questions about how did it begin is punting to what we call the Kalam cosmological argument. And it's 3 steps. First premise is that anything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And then from that, you can extrapolate a personal cause because non-personal things don't cause things to start to happen. So you got that. That's what you were trying to argue. Here's the problem, though, is that when I said the universe has always been there, you're going to have some background to be able to say, I'm pretty sure that because I also referenced the Big Bang, right? Well, there's a beginning to things. So at one point I'm saying the universe has always been here, and in the very same breath I'm saying that it began at 13.5 billion years in the past. And so I got slippery there again, and I started playing games and putting in the quantum fluctuation and stuff like that. But you have to understand, the argument is anything that begins to exist has a cause, and you have to be prepared to make the argument the universe began to exist at some finite point in time. If you got those two things, We're often running with a cause. Without one of those two things, a universe that begins, that you're just dead in the water, because it doesn't matter. So that's kalam. That's the cosmological argument for the existence of God. The moral argument for the existence of God we've already talked about. Yes, sir? Yeah. You know I'm a Christian, right? You know I'm a Christian, right? You missed the switch. You missed the switch. Okay, now I'll answer it from the atheist point of view. Ask me again. What was the question? Let me clarify that again. People weren't put on this earth from a materialistic, naturalistic point of view. Somewhere about 4.5 billion years ago, there was some sort of chemical event that happened, some combination of proteins and electrical stimulus and a pool that was just perfectly suitable for this type of event to happen, where one of them, what we would call the beginning of life, that abiogenesis or biogenesis, the moment that life comes into existence, a single-celled organism. And then over about the overwhelming majority of that time, it existed at a very basic level where it was operating at like a plant almost, in the sense of how it processed oxygen, which is what builds up the environment, which makes it an oxygen-rich environment. And after billions of years of that, then you have this like Precambrian moment where life just starts to take off and to become more complex and more organized. And over a gradual period of time, through environmental pressures, things make their way through that. That's how the atheist would answer this question. Now let's go back to how I would respond to that. That moment that I talked about with the perfect set of conditions to cause everything is almost impossible for us to replicate. And the only way we've ever been able to do so is when we very intentionally dial in the set of conditions that are necessary and very intentionally make them happen. As a matter of fact, amino acids, when they first come into existence under a natural process, tend to come in a form that can't become complex life. And so we need very certain conditions to make it happen. So they're going to say we've been able to duplicate this in the lab and make this happen again. But that's not a problem for me, because I said something made it happen. So even if they go to 4.5 billion years, now you may be a young earth creationist, but at this point you don't have to argue young earth creation, because I don't need young earth creation to be able to tell them at that moment something had to make it happen, even if I accept every other thing about the way that you've argued about the universe existing. Something had to step in. And if they say, well, we've replicated in the lab, I don't care, because that means that human beings acting very intentionally to create the right circumstances can create life. And that goes exactly with what I'm saying. God stepped in and made something happen. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes, sir. I don't think anything exists like that, but let's go ahead. Go ahead.
Is there an argument from the standpoint, so earlier, like one of your points was that having some sort of faith is detrimental to science.
Yeah. Yeah. Check out the faith of most scientists. That'll
I
help.
was going to say, is there an argument to the fact that a lot of scientific discoveries are made by Christians?
Yeah, and not just that. Now the scientific community is less Christian than it once was.
Yes.
The percentage of science of people that identify themselves as Christian in the scientific community, it stays about the same as in the general public, unless you're talking about an area like evolutionary biology, where there are clearly not a lot of Christians working in there. Not none. Samuel Conway Morris would be one, things like that, but it's not zero, but it's a much, much lower in that particular field. But here are some of the things that you would point out. Number one is that in most cultures where science has blossomed, have been dominated by a Christian worldview, because the desire to discover and pursue excellence seems to be driven in a culture that was created with the idea central to it that there is a purpose underlying everything. And the deeper that we investigate these things, the closer we get to that purpose. There have not been a lot of cultures, historically speaking, that have fostered a great deal of investigation into scientific answers and discovery that weren't rooted in that principle to begin with. Even Muslim cultures during the Dark Ages, where you would have this, where Kalam cosmological argument actually comes from, that you had these people that were rooted in this sense that the world has a purpose, and to best understand that purpose, we need to intensely study the world around us. And so, while it's true, to a point, some of the things that I said, that also covers over a lot of stuff. which is that a lot of the drive to do these things, even the landing on the moon, by the way, was largely driven by a fear of atheists getting to the moon first. I think that's funny because Dawkins was talking about how religious people things and scientists fly them to the moon. Like, well, wait a minute. The reason that we were willing to spend all the money that we were as a country was because we believed the good guys needed to get to the moon first. And we were obsessed with this idea of not allowing the bad guys to dominate the world around us, right? And so even there, that whether you like it or not, that's driving it. The idea of it, the Christian nation, discovery, advancement, pursuit, all of those sorts of things. So that's there, yes. And the particular scientists throughout history, not even just when you're talking about somebody like, blanking on his name, Newton. Sir Isaac Newton or somebody like that, but like Michael Faraday, the guy who invented the motor. And I mean, all throughout history, Pascal, who was just out of this world genius. You look at these different people, and faith was central to why they did a lot of the things that they did. Let's go, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so when you were playing fake atheist in all of your other debates or seminars, what was the best question that threw you off? Or was there ever a question that
He's too good for that.
No, I don't know. Part of the thing about being a public speaker by trade is that when you go into a place, you better be ready. And so it's difficult to catch me off guard because I've spent a lot of time getting myself ready. And I'm talking about things that audience, I think you brought it up. It was very on the spot for you guys. A couple of y'all said that. This was very impromptu for you. It's not impromptu for me. I do this all the time. And so I have a level of comfort there that comes with, I know almost everything you can possibly say before you say it. I was asked by this at my talks about the value of human life and abortion, and somebody said, how do you handle Q&A? I was like, not only can I tell you every question the audience is going to ask me, I can almost tell you the order it's going to come in. Because all the questions are the same, over and over and over again. And there's never been one there that I didn't see coming, really. But that, I don't know if that, yeah, because preparation is helpful, and it's knowing who you're going to talk about and what people ask. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, you know what? I will agree with you. They are separated from everybody else. There is a special distaste for the Christian viewpoint. My guess is, though, that was because that was the dominant view in our culture. And so that whereas, they'll fight for the right of expression of Muslims, Christians need to shut up and back off. It's not even universally true, though. It's very specific. They don't have a problem when Bono goes around raising money for Africa, even though he's driven by his Christian beliefs. Whether you agree with him being Orthodox or not, that's what he says is the reason he's doing it. And so they don't have a problem with that. They don't have a problem with Christians getting involved in trying to stop sex slavery. They just get angry if you start talking about gay marriage or abortion. Yeah. Here's what Greg Kokel gives, the standard that we're operating on. We're looking to put a stone in their shoe. You got a very short amount of time to talk to somebody. The first question was, what do you mean by that? The second question, and this is a very powerful question, is how did you come to believe what you just told me? If you make sure you ask that question before you say anything, before you tell me anything about what you believe, what do you mean by that, and how did you come to believe that? It's very powerful. A young man stood up I was on a panel in California, and this young man stood up and he said, how do you respond to the threat that transhumanism and the posthumanist philosophy makes to the church? And the two guys on the panel with me, no offense to them, they were great guys. They started answering like the guy said something important. And they talked for like 10 minutes, this and that. And I said, can you do me a favor? Just humor me when it finally came to me. How did you come to believe that transhumanism and posthumanism represented a grave threat to the Christian church? And this young man in front of an audience of several hundred people in the audience said, I saw a YouTube video. I said, all right. Do you remember who it was in the YouTube video? And he's like, some guy. I was like, all right. Was it Nick Bostrom? Was it Ray Kurzweil? Was it any of these like luminaries in the transhumanist movie? He's like, no, it was another high schooler. It's like, okay. Now, as he said this in front of the audience, suddenly the idea of what he said has come back down to something more reasonable. You know, the guys on the panel are answering this like there is some grave looming threat out there. And I'm like, what threat? What are we talking about? Let's get an example, like an actual for instance. By the answer, how did you come to believe that this problem exists? And when he told me, even he felt sheepish about it. You know, by the time he's like, yeah, some kid, I don't know who he was. It's like, okay, so you saw a kid that you don't know who he was do a YouTube video, and now you believe the Christian church is in trouble. Maybe not. You know, maybe we can just dial back the fear and the anxiety about this for a second, and then answer the question about posthumanism and transhumanism. But asking those questions is key. Yes, sir.
Answer the question, like you say, like someone will ask, the universe came from nothing. Like, how did God?
I'm gonna. Yeah, God is not the kind of thing that begins to exist. I said in the universe and God fall into two different kind of categories. And so God, in classical theology, we actually believe that God is an eternal being. By his very nature, non-created, a necessary being, something that doesn't exist contingently, but he exists in and of his own. He has divine aseity. He has perfect existence in that sense. And so when we differentiate between those kind of things, let me say this. My son's at a lacrosse practice, and unfortunately, because of a mix-up of the time, I have to go. I live just a few minutes from here. So if you ever want me to come back and to work with you guys again at some other point, I would be happy to come back and do that again and to get more into the actual tactics of engaging people and everything. But I really appreciate you guys letting me come. I really had a great time.